Welcome to the For the Love of the Game podcast with your hosts, Jefferson Belfort and Brian Hernandez. We are at episode 24. Brian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. I'm doing really good. It is a snowy day here in Jersey. I'm very jealous that I don't have Miami weather, but we will survive. And looking forward to today's episode. We actually have a pretty fun topic for today. It's a little not our usual. Just like let's talk about what happened during this week and all that. So I'm very excited for it. How you doing, Jeff?
Doing pretty good, can't really complain. Nets had a pretty good week. I was happy to see them go up against the likes of a team like Philly and go in there and completely thrash them. But one part of it that is not being spoken of is Nets did get a couple losses last week, but in those games, in every one of those games since Kevin Durant has been back, they've looked really, really good. And it speaks to how much this team evolves when Kevin Durant is on the court and able to play or even be present. Even if it was for a few minutes, his impact would be felt on this team. So thankfully, it's not a few minutes, and I'm
Well, yeah, no, with just to touch on that, like just a little bit of it's yeah, we've been seeing before, like you're saying, the last couple months or so, the Nets have been losing some games. They dropped their standings and everything, but I've never really taken it that seriously because a loss in a game that doesn't have Kyrie and Kevin Durant, or like just even one of them on the floor at the same time at once, like that loss doesn't really mean too much to me. So that's why it's really nice to be able to see, you have Kevin Durant back. He's consistently playing. He's looking fantastic. Never missed a beat. And Kyrie dropping 50 and all this other stuff. Man, Kyrie's something else. But yeah, it's the Nets are looking nice, man. Nets are looking nice.
Yep. Let's see. Let's see if they find some continuity in the last 15 minutes. 15 minutes. 15 games season.
Yeah, and
But
this is without Ben Simmons too. Sorry, it blows my mind like to see how well they play, and it's like, oh, we still have another weapon waiting to come out. Insane.
exactly. Then I guess it's time for us to get right into our topics of today. And to start off the show, we are 2 years removed from when Rudy Gobert decided to infamously touch all of the mics in the press room, and the rest was history from that point on. And COVID started to impact the everyday lives of NBA players and honestly sports fans alike. So today we've cooked up the topic on biggest what ifs, stemming from that stoppage in time and inevitably the bubble. Then our next topic is a big congratulations to Gregg Popovich now being the all-time winnings coach in the NBA history. But is he the greatest coach of all time? And then lastly, we'll go over our weekly roundup and go from there.
All right, let's get into it. I'll start off first with our what if scenario. If none of this stuff happened with Rudy Gobert, I mean, he didn't cause it, but with the pandemic and everything else, what would the NBA actually look like, and what would happen in these scenarios? And of course, the biggest one I want to start off with is when we look at that season, it was the bubble season. And then you have everyone calls Anthony Davis a Disney instead of a Disney. You got the Lakers playing amazing that playoffs. A lot of players just barely missing shots. Shooting percentages went out the roof. Miami went to the finals, and no one was really expecting that too much. So my thoughts is with the Lakers, they won the championship, and in the playoffs too, in the bubble, they looked pretty dominant. They pretty much dominated every series that they played in. And my question is like, we all know the bubble was like an anomaly, and it kind of changed. Like a lot of players talked about it of being like a open gym scenario, and it didn't really. The fans really change how players play and all this other stuff. So let's say the Lakers actually never won that championship. How does this actually affect LeBron's legacy, especially with the Lakers? Because just to give some background before I want to get your thoughts, Jeff, of like the Lakers, just the first season with LeBron's first season with the Lakers, with Lonzo and Brandon Ingram and the rest of the kids, they went 37-45. And then the second season, that was the bubble year, they went 52-19, which is pretty dominant in the regular season, and they won that championship. And then the third season, the 2020 to 2021 season, was a first round exit to the Suns, and who of course went to the finals, but their regular season record was 42-30. And now this season, a bunch of injuries happening, not looking great. The Lakers stand at the moment 29-37. So Jeff, my question to you is, how would this affect LeBron's legacy? And how do you think like even the bubble stuff affected the Lakers then?
It would just prove to be that, and I don't want to disrespect the bubble, but it really does feel like that was an anomaly year
Yeah.
for everything that happens. Because if you realistically take what you just said, 3 out of the 4 years that LeBron has been there, they have been subpar. That's what I heard. And yes, they were the 1 seed before the bubble, but and that momentum could have very well helped them win the championship, even if we continued the season. But based off of like we mentioned, 3 out of 4 times a similar result is produced already initially makes me think that, yeah, this is not the norm. Like what happened there was not the norm. Another thing that I think we had to keep in mind with the bubble and the escalation to getting the bubble was that it essentially served as like a training camp for teams that were essentially already ready to make that jump to win a championship, had title aspirations. They've already locked up seeding. So those teams were a little bit more eager to getting back on the court. As I don't know if you remember, there was a lot of strifes in between players that were deciding whether or not they wanted to go back or felt that it was safe to go back to start playing again. And, Lakers were a big advocate to going back because a lot of people viewed them as title favorites, and I really another aspect of it that I felt like affected it greatly too was just the aspect that teams very well, the Lakers were in the same boat too, but teams were affected by losing players that just couldn't come to the bubble because they had COVID, or they had to leave the bubble because they had COVID, right? So that's affected a lot of things as well. And then lastly, you spoke about legacy. I think it would greatly, greatly impact LeBron's legacy because the Lakers fans, you see it even this year, are not a forgiving folk. Like they let you hear it. And if LeBron was not able to produce 4 seasons in a row, uh, he would be hearing it for the rest of his life, honestly, from Lakers fans.
Yeah, it's that would be so bad. Already we see like this whole tenure is pretty bad just aside, but there is that championship that still like kind of saves it of like, all right, at least LeBron did bring a championship to the Lakers, even though it was the bubble. Um, what I did find interesting when I was doing my research on the Lakers was, of course, like we mentioned, the Lakers were a good team to begin with. But the most interesting thing is when I was looking at for that year where teams actually ranked in offense and defense and compared to the rest of their league. Generally, from what I saw of like let's say Milwaukee was the sixth best offense in the league, and then compared to where they were in the playoffs, they were like the ninth best offense and like stuff like that. Usually, the jumps that I would see were like between like 1 point or one spot, two spots, three spots. But what I found the most interesting was the Lakers in the regular season were the 11th best offense and the third best defense. They had a very great defense. You know, you had JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard, all of them. Like, they were playing very well at that time. So they went from the 11th best offense to the third best offense when it came to the bubble. And that was like, that's probably the biggest jump that I've seen when I was looking through all these different teams, of just like mostly every team kind of consistently stayed where they were, or maybe dropped down a little bit, of like the Clippers weren't playing as well and all that stuff. But it was just really surprising to see the Lakers went from 11 best offense to the third best offense. And it was just, you can tell a lot of other teams had a lot of things on their mind. There was a lot of like turmoil back and forth, but the Lakers really took advantage of that opportunity and, you know, stepped it up when it mattered most.
Hey, just a little technical difficulty, but we're back. Yeah, so back on what we were mentioning. Yeah, no, the stark difference of how they played in the bubble and they played during the season, even though, like I mentioned, they were still the number one seed,
Yeah.
was night and day. Because for to give a guy like LeBron at age 35 at that point, and a guy like AD that consistently has injury issues, more than 3 to 4 months to sit down and rest is paramount for that type of player. And then let's be honest, the how long was the run? Like, how long was the run from the bubble? I believe it started in June or July, right?
Yeah.
And then went on to August, early September. So that's around like 3 months. Like, they just needed to stay healthy 3 months after taking months of rest, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So it boosted the team that was already the number one seed to a point where uh, they could bring back all of their players. And then I guess this is a part of the legacy you could say is effective for LeBron, is that for it to have all of them collectively buy into it and want to win this championship. I don't think they did it just for him, but
Yeah.
I do think that they wanted to win the championship a little bit more than everybody else that year, and they showed that by when there was deliberations about whether or not to have a bubble.
Yeah. I just even thinking of like a lot of people on that team had like, I guess I'm mainly thinking of like, well, one, of course, LeBron wanted to win that championship. Rondo was on that team. He played like there's a lot of older players that were big names and like had something that they wanted to prove. Of like LeBron, of course, wanted to bring a championship to the Lakers, but like you have like Dwight Howard, who like never won a championship before, wanting really stepping it up. You had Rondo, who of course won a championship with the Celtics, but his career kind of dropped off after that, made a really nice resurgence there. And it was kind of like the perfect storm for the Lakers, in my opinion. So that's what makes at least that whole scenario pretty interesting. But I would have loved to see how that season would have progressed without the stoppage and the pandemic, and then having to go to the bubble, and then players, you know, deciding not to play and to go, and all this other mess. It would have been, in my opinion, it probably would have been a different outcome at the end of the day, but we'll never know.
Exactly. And I guess that's a perfect segue to my first topic. And, last year this team was heralded the NBA champions last year. Obviously, there's some that still believe that maybe very well they couldn't. They There was chances that they could have very well not have been the been the champion last year. But this year in 2019, 2020, before the stoppage, they were very well on their way to winning that championship that year and were very well on their way for a collision course with the Los Angeles Lakers. The numbers that we were seeing from Giannis was out of this world. And this is a team before they had even Jrue Holiday on that team as well. They looked head and shoulders above the rest of the league at this point. And then for the stoppage to happen, greatly affected them when they came back to the bubble, which they posted I believe it was, let's see the exact numbers. I'm sorry. It was a 4-5 record when they came back to play those remaining 9 games before heading into the playoffs, where they were stopped by the Miami Heat in a very underwhelming series where it was barely competitive, losing 4-1 to the Miami Heat. So my what if for this situation is, what if Giannis was able to obtain that championship that year and this year, and now we would be looking at him as a 2-time champion, and how would that greatly affect his legacy?
Whew. So that was actually that was such an interesting like playoffs because, well, one, like you're saying, like Giannis coming beforehand was like looking fantastic and all this other stuff, and it was a real disappointment that that they lost like that. And this is where it's kind of funny of like the next season, the head coach's job was like really on the line because there's been no playoff success that entire time. Um, I think there's two ways you can probably look at this. So one, if Giannis won that championship and then won still the next year, like so in my opinion, I think at the end of Giannis's career, he has a very good shot of being the greatest of all time. In my, like, just looking how young he is, looking how dominant he's been this entire time, that's where I kind of see where him going. But I think if he had those two like that, I think it'd be like the like right now I'm like, oh, maybe he can get there. I think like right away he'd be in that conversation of just being one of the greatest of all time. Like I think he would already been like in a top 10 of greatest of all time list easily, and then getting close to that top 5 and then top 3 conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. He would have done something that I believe it was only Michael Jordan that we
Yeah.
saw did, that is win an MVP and win a Defensive Player of the Year, and then essentially win a championship and a Finals MVP. I'm assuming he would win the Finals MVP.
Yeah.
You know, and that would have put him so far above head and shoulders of all of the players that are in the league right now.
Yeah.
Just because of what that meant. Like that is an accomplishment that not everyone could even think about that feat, right?
Yeah.
Like only a few people have been even in conversation for stuff like that. So if he was able to do that, it would have blown the world away. And then look at the stats, man. He was averaging nearly 30 points per game. He was nearly averaging 14 rebounds per game off of close to 6 assists per game. And the team just flowed through him that year. It was just so fluid. They looked like they knew what they had to do. And then they're coming back off of that disappointing loss from I'm forgetting his name right now. Kawhi Leonard, the year
Oh yeah,
previous in the Eastern Conference Finals. So they had motivation, a reason to fight that season, and then it was cut in half, right
yeah.
in half on them.
I'm also the other way I was kind of thinking of it is like, would he have had the playoffs that he had last season where they won because of just like I can only imagine that first playoff run where like now you're about to win the championship. Like he has so much to prove. Look at everything that happened in the past, that huge disappointment of losing in the first round. Like I'm sure that drove him so much harder to win last season. Like that had to be like a huge reason that he got there. And I'm sure he could still have done it if he won during the bubble, but that's just something like that's kind of interesting to think about with Giannis.
It is interesting. I think you're right. It This year will be a better answer to that question than we
Mm-hmm.
can even say right now because
Exactly.
it would be the same situation, as
Yeah,
we're explaining. So we'll see. We'll see.
man. He also thinking about it, like you're saying, if he won that in 2019, he was 25, so MVP, defensive
Two time,
player,
two
like
time at that
yeah,
point.
oh my gosh, like that's insane. He's 27 now, and like man, Giannis. That's why I keep saying I think Giannis can definitely end his career with like in that top 3 conversation of greatest of all time. That's where
The biggest thing he needs to do is find a way to clear the path of LeBron
yeah,
and KD at this point in his career, so he could really cement. Like I'm not saying he's gonna wish ill on these guys,
yeah.
but he's gonna have to hope that these guys stop playing soon. So there's not as much accolades he has to chase, but
True.
all three of them uniquely have won awards in the league in different ways
Yeah.
that make them special. But at the same time, they all are amazing at what they do.
Yeah, it is true. They all do like different things, but they all exceed still. Well, all right.
I,
So, all right, sorry, please go.
I'll digress to one last thing. Right? Is This is always an interesting topic to me. Is we always put him into the greatest conversation, the greatest player or one of the
Yeah,
greatest players, but the greatest player in the league right now conversation, Kevin Durant. But like the accolades, when you really look at it, just not does not match even Giannis at this point, or
yeah.
doesn't match greatly does not match LeBron James. Do you think that's to a fault of him, or it's been like the league has always seemed to find someone else that they rather give their trophies to at that time?
I think it's a combination of it's the stories. Well, one, we all know when it comes to awards, the stories are actually the biggest thing. Like, how did that person get to the point where they are? And if you look at Kevin Durant, especially with what he did of going to the Warriors, that's where a lot of people don't give him as much credit as he deserves, just because of he went to a team that he almost beat already, and that was considered the best team already there, like in the NBA at that time, and just dominated for the next couple years. Like, and it was easy for them essentially. That's where it just like, if you're going to give the award to somebody, you're going to give it to somebody else that had to come through a lot more, or even Steph Curry at that time. Um, Even though Kevin Durant is like we've been talking about this entire time, he's arguably right now the greatest player playing, and he's been for the past decade. He's just that dominant, but it's the path of his career that definitely hinders his accolades. So next, with my next topic for the what if, I kind of like this one. So let's see how this goes. So mine is about the Knicks. And this is, of course, relating to the Knicks weren't in the bubble. So since the Knicks weren't in the bubble, they had from March to December was their offseason, because December 11th was the start of the preseason. So literally, Julius Randle is sitting at home watching the bubble, practicing every single day, going hard for all those months. What is that? 8 months, just practicing nonstop. And that's when we saw the Knicks kind of blow up off the backs off the back of Julius Randle. And then the Knicks had last season had the fourth seed in the East, and we saw where that led up to. And like Julius Randle was putting up career numbers the entire time. He was shooting like 40% from three, even though like the last couple seasons he was like 27 or something like that. It was terrible. So his number shot up. And my question is like, if this bubble never happened, if the pandemic never happened, Julius Randle probably would have had his regular 3-month off season, all the regular stuff. And I think the Knicks probably wouldn't have been as good as they were. So they had to sit that entire offseason, that 8-month offseason, just thinking and just training and just do all that stuff. And it kind of led them to be the team that they were. So if that never happened, I believe the Knicks probably would have lived up to expectations. And the expectations were one of the worst teams in the NBA. So if the Knicks were one of the worst teams in the NBA, they got a top 5 pick. Let's even say they were number 5 or whatever. If draft lottery odds and all that stuff happen, they're number 5. How do you think the Knicks' future looks with maybe not as good Julius Randle, but you still have RJ Barrett? Maybe you have one of Jalen Suggs, Scotty Barnes, whatever, any of those guys. How do you think the Knicks look in that future versus what we have now?
It's kind of crazy. You'll think I'm crazy when I say this. Actually, I don't think you will think I'm crazy, but possibly other Knicks fans will think that I'm crazy when I say this. But I think that would have been the best thing to happen, honestly, because what we've seen in the last year is because of that unexpected jump, Leon Rose like changed course a little bit.
Yep.
And that was the biggest thing that we heard when Leon Rose was coming in, when Worldwide West was coming in, was that they weren't going to change course, that they were going to build from within to do it the right way. And granted, you know what? They are, to a certain degree, they are doing that because RJ Barrett is looking like the player that they want him to be, right? But we all thought that he was not going to be here this long. We all knew that Julius Randle was eventually going to move along from this team. But after that one great year, they decided to extend him. And he got exactly what he wanted at that point. He got exactly what he wanted. He got the acclaim. He became critically acclaimed in that sense. It's the best situation that he could have wished for. But granted, like you said, I think the best way to put it is if you gave me 5 months to study the SATs with an SAT prep teacher, and you give a guy, even if he's the smartest guy out there, a week to study for it, and he gets no help, of course I'm probably going to do better than him because I took the time. I had the practice to get to the point where I could exceed at that test. And that's exactly what it was for Julius Randle. All he needed to focus on, and his SAT was getting that bag last summer, right? So he needed to figure out how do I get to the bag. and he hit all the right buttons. He said all the right stuff. It just goes to show. I hate players that get into these mindsets of like
Mhm.
you know extension years or free agency years, where they're going to ball out and become a completely company guy for that year, and then they want to flip the script after that, right? And that's exactly what he did, which I can't blame him for it. Like
Yeah.
he wants to make money. It's his job. He's trying to get the most out of his situation. So I can't blame him for that. But I can blame him for what he's putting out as a product after the fact. And I really do think that if it didn't go that route, we wouldn't have to be dealing with this. So another aspect of it that I wanted to talk about too, and Brian, feel free to jump in
Yeah.
when if you feel you want to add to this, is we look at two teams that exploded last year, and then we look at one team that essentially went down in the East last year. And the correlation that I bring to those three teams is the impact of what the bubble was, right? So you have a team in the Raptors who, for a lot of us, I don't think we thought the Raptors that year were going to still be as competitive as they were,
Mhm.
losing Kawhi, but they remained at the second seed. I believe they made it all the way to the semifinals.
Yeah, they lost to
Uh,
the Celtics.
and that was a competitive series. But even then, I didn't think that they would make it that far, right?
Mhm.
Or even be in contention for that, So then the next season, they come back after being in the bubble for X amount of months and a shortened off season. They come back and they do not look great. Then you go on the flip side of it, you have two teams being the Knicks and being the Hawks that both did not have to go to the bubble.
Yeah.
And they had that prolonged time, like you mentioned, to better their games and get the most out of their players. And like you saw the season that both teams had. I think it is a byproduct of that. We
Yeah.
had to be cognizant of the external factors that could affect the season, and that greatly affects a season.
Yeah. I think we're talking about here with the Knicks, where I think how this affected the bubble kind of hurts them long term. But with the Raptors, it actually kind of helped them long term because, like you mentioned, they had to play through the bubble. They had to last season they weren't even able to play in Toronto for the most part. They had to play in where was it? Tampa.
Tampa.
Yeah, they had to play in Tampa and all that stuff, so they didn't even get to play home games, and they ended up getting the fourth seed or not the fourth seed, the fourth pick at the end of the day, and getting Scotty Barnes. And now look at them, like it kind of helped them out, and then but for the Knicks side, it really did kind of mess up everything because, like you mentioned, the Knicks did not plan to keep Julius Randle. They drafted Obi Toppin, who plays the same position as Julius Randle at the 8th pick because that was supposed to be his replacement. And they were trying to trade him the entire offseason. They could not do it. They were trying to do all this other stuff, and then he just blows up out of nowhere, and it kind of goes, all right, forget trying to lose. Let's trade for Derrick Rose. Forget Obi Top, and he's gonna play 10 minutes a game, and we just drafted him at number 8. And he was also supposed to be an NBA ready rookie, and it's just like, nope, we're gonna leave him alone. We're focusing on Julius Randle because they both just play the same position. Randle's playing so much better. The one question mark where I do have is if they were bad. And let's, like I was saying, maybe they get the 5th pick. And then I know from reports that the Knicks were even thinking about trading RJ Barrett to Orlando to get that 5th pick and draft Jalen Suggs. And that was like the report of last season of like that was almost a thing they were really considering. So if they were in that position and they had that pick and he could have just drafted Jalen Suggs. Out of all those guys, so far, Jalen Suggs Probably not the guy you want at the moment. I was very high on
Sorry.
Jalen Suggs coming out of the draft, but he has not had a great season. He's scoring 12 points a game, 4 assists, 3 rebounds. He's shooting 22% from three and 36% from the field. He is not playing well at all. Now he has a ton of time to actually get better going forward, and he still could be a really good player. But yeah, that would be just the one thing of like, if they drafted there, they probably would have ended up with Jalen Suggs, and then they kind of still would be like sucking for all these years.
What's funny is I think the pick that you would rather have is the pick that's above it that
Yeah,
we just
exactly.
talked about, is get Scotty Barnes in there. And that
Yeah,
would make more sense if you, instead of giving RJ, you gave Julius and you gave that 8th pick. And then,
yeah,
you get the 4th pick. What does RJ Scotty Barnes look like? That sounds like it would look good to me. You
man.
know?
Any of those guys, literally from like, except for Jalen Suggs, like any of those guys of Jalen Green, Evan Mobley, you have Josh Giddey, you have Kuminga, like all those guys probably are better, and it would have been really nice. But
You could go
yeah,
as far up as the 9th pick. It
yeah,
would be all serviceable guys that could help the
exactly.
Knicks. You know,
That would be pretty insane. But sadly, we are in the reality where Julius Randle is still on this team. And even though he is playing a little bit better, still that attitude is kind of there. And I don't know what's going to happen now going forward, but we'll see.
yeah. Last part about that too, it would have been an expiring contract to give.
Yes.
So you would have that expiring contract of Julius Randle and the pick, which would make it a lot easier to offload him
Yeah.
and get the what you wanted in that situation. But it is what
That would have been a nice situation to be in. If only we can go to that reality.
it is. Well, now that's a perfect segue into going from one theoretical trade to one trade that was to a couple trades that actually did happen, but could have been theoretical if the bubble never happened or COVID never happened in my mind. And that trade that I'm thinking of is in the bubble. We saw out west. There's a couple teams that we thought could put up a fight against the Lakers, and one of those teams was the Houston Rockets that inevitably showed that they had no chance against the Lakers. They even were disrespectful enough to disrespect their future teammate and giving him giving him all of the space to take threes throughout that bubble series. And we all know where Westbrook is now at this point. But that was an interesting series. James Harden did have a pretty good series, but he was ready for some changes. He went into that summer, and honestly, it was the whole summer we heard nothing. It wasn't until probably a week or two out before training camp that the rumors started to happen that James Harden was considering a move out east to potentially the Sixers, the Nets, and I believe there was a third team as well, but irrelevant at this point. but the momentum started to quickly go towards it. It's going towards the Nets. I remember James Harden, Kyrie, KD met up and were playing in what is now called the FTX Arena in Miami, and they were playing some pickup, and there was just so much momentum heading towards, hey, there's going to be a trade before training camp starts, and James Harden's going to be a part of the Brooklyn Nets. and a couple back and forth with that. But this is where I tie in a second trade. So as the East is starting to sense that this is what's going to happen, or inevitably this is what is going to happen, there was another team that was making their run out west, putting themselves in a contention for a spot for the play in, but inevitably they weren't able to make it. This team is the Pelicans. I believe Zion had to step away from the bubble for a few games for some family issues, and that affected their seeding and their chances of getting in the play-in. But there was one player on that team that was balling out, and his name was Jrue Holiday. Jrue Holiday wind up, unfortunately for a Nets fan, becoming a casualty of war in the sense of the Harden speculation, as the Bucks decided, we need to bolster our team if this is what's going to happen, and they did a daring trade to bring in Jrue Holiday, and on a trade that at the moment I thought was ridiculous to give up 3 picks for Jrue Holiday. They also made some moves to try to move away from DiVincenzo and bring Brogdon, but that trade got voided. But they clearly was showing you that they see what's happening and they want to contend. So my question is, if the bubble never happened or if COVID never happened, do you think we see a trade that eventually would land James Harden elsewhere and inevitably lead Jrue Holiday to the Bucks?
Oh man, this is actually really interesting. The Jrue Holiday fit was just so perfect, but like you're saying, I think like you're definitely right in the sense of the James Harden thing made Milwaukee more desperate to trade, because like you're saying, at that time Jrue Holiday wasn't necessarily thought to be the same player that he is right now with the Bucks. Jrue Holiday was a good player, but that was kind of about it. Of like we all like Jrue Holiday. Everyone knows Jrue Holiday is very good, but like not an all-star, not anything, like nothing too crazy. But then when he went to the Bucks, it was really just a perfect role for him. And so like you're saying, if they're trying to get him, so remind me again, you said that, because I remember that voided trade. They try to get Brogdon from
Sacramento.
Got it.
Brogdon eventually got traded to the Hawks, right?
Yeah.
But they were moving away from DiVincenzo, I believe it was.
Yes.
In that package, and then getting in Brogdon, which I think is a very lateral trade. I don't think that impacted them as much.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I was one of the believers that Jrue Holiday is not a needle mover for me. But we saw he became a needle mover. He honestly is one of the reasons why they made it past the Nets in that second round. There was pivotal moments like Game 7 where he hit clutch shots that took them to where they needed to be.
Yeah, he's definitely a huge reason why they won. And yeah, so I don't know if they make that trade, because like you're saying, at that time too, no one really thought of Jrue Holiday as that needle mover. So 3 first-round picks is pretty crazy. But hey, they hindsight, it was a perfect move. But looking at like the James Harden situation, that's where it's a little like interesting, mainly of just like, I wonder if Philly would have done any more if they would have tried to do a bigger package for James Harden at all, or anyone else would have tried to done a bigger package. That's where the question is. What do you think about the whole James Harden?
You mean in that off season
Yeah.
or for the second trade?
No, the off season.
Yeah, I think that at that moment, the way how James Harden was going about it,
Yeah.
they knew that there was only one team on his mind. As much as James Harden is saying now that he only had one team in his mind
Exactly.
is the Sixers, let's not play it as we were not alive for that. We're
Yeah.
not dumb. We saw what James Harden was doing. He was convinced. I'm not going to say he wasn't
Yeah.
convinced, but he was convinced that he could win a championship with the Brooklyn Nets. And he pulled all the stops to make sure that he could get there, right?
Yeah.
It was theoretically put out there. It was overtly put in the faces of Nets players and the rest of the roster that would be affected by the trade. It was everywhere, and for him to act like it, like I always wanted to be a Sixer. it's just it's just hilarious. But I think that there could have been more compelling packages, but at this moment, at this age of
Yeah.
how players affect trades, they knew that James Harden would make life hard if you trade him to the wrong place,
Yeah.
right? And you don't want to be the team that's picking up a guy that's going to make life hard when you already see that they're already doing that, right?
That's very true.
So that's my first part about it. One part that I think is forgotten or is the interesting part about this is that essentially James Harden is like is the is to the Nets what the snap is to Marvel with Thanos. And I'll explain why I say it like that. Is think about how like with the snap, how it erased things, right? Or it got rid of half of the population in the universe, right? I'm connecting that in the sense of the type of players that the Nets had um, before that trade. I think they were destined to win a championship with that type of team, right? It was a well balanced team.
Mm-hmm.
It was you have Karis LeVert being a wing that not the best defender, but could get his own shot. You have a guy in Jared Allen's that's becoming a star at what he does on the defensive side of the ball and being a center. And obviously there's other pieces, but I just don't remember everyone right now. I can't. I
Yeah.
should
Yeah.
pull it up, but you understand what I'm saying is that there was impactful like players that left the team.
Yeah.
When James Harden decided to leave the Nets, he essentially reversed the snap where you bring similarly
Mm-hmm.
players that are similarly the same thing, but a better package of it. Honestly, you trade when you come down to it. When it comes down to it, you look back at the trade and you look at it like this: is that the Nets gave up Karis LeVert, they
Yep.
gave up Jared Allen, and they got back Seth Curry, they got back uh, uh, Ben Simmons. We still don't know what type of
Yeah.
player Ben Simmons going to look like, but I'm sure it's not going to be bad. And you bring back Andre Drummond as well, and you look at that and you're like, that's actually, if that was a straight up
Yeah.
trade 2 years ago, everyone would have took that, everyone
Yeah.
would have took that.
No, everyone would have definitely taken that. Especially like we got to remember that although Jared Allen was very good back then, he's not the Jared Allen that he is now. The all-star Jared Allen. Like Jared Allen, once he was traded, blew up and was playing fantastic. Karis LeVert, probably a better player than the value that he has now. And then all those other first round picks that they gave up, but still you get like a little bit back. Man, like you're saying, I'd do that trade 100 times out of 100 to get Seth Curry, Drummond, and Ben Simmons for all that. That's
Yep.
that's a no-brainer trade.
And Stephen A. Smith said a few weeks ago, is that Daryl Morey would regret that he made this trade. And obviously, these are sports pundits. They always say stuff just to
Yeah.
get people going. But this was the one of those times where I actually agree with him. Is Charles Barkley said on Thursday that it's 10 years that these guys would be together. I don't think it's going to be that long.
10
But
years.
but even if you could get 10 years out of Ben Simmons, if you get Ben Simmons to make a career out of being a part of the Nets, that's a whole different story. But to have even KD locked up for the next 5 years and have Ben Simmons, obviously the biggest wild card is going to be Kyrie Irving. But I even think that is a blessing in disguise. Is if Kyrie decides this is just not for him anymore, what's stopping the Nets from getting a player like a Dame Lillard onto this team, getting another guy that's of that same ilk? Obviously, I personally believe that Kyrie's better than Dame Lillard. Other people have other opinions, but that's me personally.
I thought that was pretty like obvious, especially with the season that Dame is having right now. Like
exactly. But that so. I really do think that the Sixers have long term made the Nets better. For the short term, they've gotten what they wanted to achieve and go for a run at a championship. But if it doesn't happen, you're in the same boat that the Nets were at last year when they were wondering, how long can we go with this?
Yeah, definitely this that's why I like this whole entire trade was a little interesting on the Sixers end. More just of like it is a very high risk, high reward move. But the risk is so high because we keep talking about the moment Joel Embiid gets an injury, season's done. Even if the moment that James Harden gets an injury, season's done. So now your season literally just lies on two guys. And on the Nets end, even as we see, when one player is out, one player is in, of like Kevin Durant or Kyrie, not the biggest deal. Of course, you want both those guys on, but the rest of the team is pretty well rounded. Especially now with like, look how well they're playing, and they don't even have Ben Simmons there. And like, we all forget how good still Ben Simmons is. Even if we look at the non-scoring part, even though he is a good finisher, we'll see how he does shooting. It's long term, Nets are in a great position. And I think I said this in one of the earlier podcasts of like, no matter what, the Nets are never going to be in a bad situation for a while, in my opinion, is mainly because of having Kevin Durant and Kyrie. Of like, when you trade these guys, you get so much in return. When you get a superstar, especially the way that the Nets got those two guys, of just signing them. And also of like, there was a sign and trade with Kevin Durant, but you give up D'Angelo Russell. Of like, you don't like, it's so, you have so much value there. So if they want to leave, you get so much in return. So regardless, going forward in the future, you're pretty much set. The only time you ever lose with a superstar is if you lose them in free agency, and like, that's it. So like, even we think about the scenario of the Pelicans. If the Pelicans were to lose Zion and Zion were to force a trade, it's a trade. They're going to get so much in return, even for injured Zion and all this other stuff. Like, it's so much value that they never really lose too much long term.
I agree. And that's the and the whole part of it is that is the value of why they were even able to sell James Harden on being there, and even at that moment, they had enough young players to rely on, two bona fide stars figuring it out. Like, it really did feel like just at that time they had enough to win a championship. With James Harden, it just felt like they have to win a championship, and that's where it shifted back to that. Is they have enough to win a championship, and it's not more of like they need to win a championship, because now the pressure, the clock is all turned on the Sixers. they'll decide to do what they want to do. But who knows? In my mind, I don't think it's going to be successful. I don't think there's enough time to figure everything out this year and then next year. If only thing I think could rectify things is moving away from Tobias, but who's picking up that
No
contract,
one wants that.
even if it's expiring, you know? So,
No, yeah, not a lot of not a lot of teams have that type of cap space. And then two, that's not just someone you take for nothing. Like when you trade, sadly, Tobias Harris is not a value. When you trade him, you have to put at least a second round pick or something there. That's to give the other team incentive to pick up his contract. And that's where Tobias Harris is just like he was such a good player, and he's just he really drags the Sixers down, sadly, on that end of like where they're able to move going forward, of like what improvements can they do, because he's still a productive player at times.
I agree. I agree. All right, I guess that's we went pretty
Yes,
long on that what ifs,
we're
but I
56.
think I think there's a lot more topics to be had about this.
Yeah,
And I would love for us to at a later time or maybe another podcast.
yeah,
I'm not in this episode, but at a later time, like set up some time to do something like this again because
for sure.
I think it interesting topics. It's interesting
Yeah,
topics.
it's like we mentioned, like there's so many different avenues of how this affected the entire league that we can go on for this for hours. Where, yeah, I'm happy. We'll definitely do this again. We want to
Yep.
move on
So
to Gregg Popovich.
exactly. And last thing I'll say about what we just mentioned is if the listeners feel that it's something they want to hear again,
Yeah,
just let us know and we'll go right into that. But like you mentioned, first we got to congratulate Gregg Popovich on becoming the all-time winningest coach in NBA history.
yeah,
Um, to start, Gregg Popovich's career is storied beyond measure
yeah,
compared to a lot of other players, a lot of other, I mean, coaches in that sense. But some of the accolades just to look over before we speak about the specifics is I believe Gregg Popovich is sitting now on actually he's only weirdly enough he's only won 3 coaches of the year, which I'm still sure that's more than most people.
yeah.
But he has a plethora of coaches of the month. I don't want to go into counting all of them, but the biggest thing on his resume is going to go down is winning those 5 championships, making it to 6. There's a case for it. It should have been a non-blemished record of 6-0, but Ray Allen decided to ruin the party. But the what he's been able to do over his storied career, being able to be part of San Antonio since even the beginning of uh, David Robinson's career in '88, being an assistant coach, then making it his way to being the coach in '97, which was a season, his first season as a coach was a laugher. And the only reason why it was a laugher was because David Robinson wasn't there that year. And what did they do to the next year? They flipped that into Tim Duncan and were able to go 56-26. From that point on, it became a storied franchise. Being able to win that championship the next year against the Knicks. The Knicks was an amazing story that year too, being an 8th seed, making it all the way to the finals on a shortened season, lockout season. But for him to go out and win 6, obviously with the help of Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, guys like Kawhi Leonard, Patty Mills. There's a lot of players to name that contributed to him becoming one of the best coaches of all time. But now it's time to ask the question, Brian: is he the greatest coach of all time?
So this one's a little bit tough, but I actually think I'm gonna say the greatest coach of all time. Yes, I think you can really see it as a conversation of two people, and it's really Phil Jackson and Gregg Popovich. Of like, at least these are the two that I think of as the greatest coaches. And Phil Jackson, where he beats Gregg Popovich, is the championships as a head coach. Phil Jackson has 11 championships as a head coach. We also got to think about the type of players that Phil Jackson has coached, of like some of the greatest players of all time, like actually the greatest players of Michael Jordan and Kobe and Shaq and all this. Like, so there's a little more to, I guess, to that story, but where I give Gregg Popovich the edge is really where the impact that they've had on the game. And what I mean by that is we look at their coaching tree and we look at the people that have come from their system, the people that have become coaches from head coaches after being assistants for Gregg Popovich. How, like, literally anytime you see somebody get a head coaching job, they're like, oh, who were they assistant coach under? Almost every single time, Gregg Popovich is an influence on that. There's so many of like, there's Mike Budenholzer, James Borrego as players. Gregg Popovich has coached Steve Kerr, Monty Williams, Doc Rivers, Ime Udoka, like, and then as well of we look at all these other people that also kind of fit this mold of, you see like Mike Malone now, who's really thought to be a great head coach, of like, now look at his assistants, and then the coaching tree just jumps so much further. And then you kind of look at like Phil Jackson's coaching tree. It's pretty horrendous. It's really bad. You have you have like Kurt Rambis with a record of well, at this time I was looking at this, and this is actually pretty bad. I think I'm looking at this. This is a 2014 article I'm looking at, but at that time it was 56 and 154. Of like, it was really bad. You got Jim Clemens, who's 28 and 70, Frank Hamlin, who's 33 and 71. You have even think about of like Derek Fisher that he brought in, like really bad. And honestly, maybe I'm definitely a little biased here. Of like, after Phil Jackson as like a president, kind of sours my mouth on it. But we understand Phil Jackson's great head coach, but I have to give the edge to Gregg Popovich here. What do you think?
You know, I 100% agree with you. Is my thinking is that you are always going to be, like you mentioned, judged by what you're able to pass on to next generation, right? And when you do that, that's your lasting impact to the game, right? I know there's great coaches that have done that or have been able to try that with certain coaches, and some coaches just cannot embody that the same way. I'll take a example outside of the NBA, in like Bill Belichick for the New England Patriots and NFL. He always is grooming the next guy within his tree so that they could be successful elsewhere. But most of them don't become successful. So a lot of it is you striking that success as well. But my God, the way how Popovich has empowered some other guys within the history, I agree. You spoke about some notable ones, a few ones that didn't even weren't even coaches. Is notable for me is Sean Marks is from that tree as well. He was an assistant coach, but he made the jump to being the GM for the Nets, in 2016. Then you got Mike Brown I don't know if you mentioned Mike Brown. Mike
I don't
Brown
think I
was a
have.
part of that tree as well.
Yeah.
You know, he was a part of that '03 finals team that beat the Nets. but you know, like it's just he's impacted so much parts of basketball in a way that Phil Jackson just like casually touches upon it.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest difference between both guys is that Gregg is more of implementation type of guy. Like he has a style he wants to play. He has a way he believes that you win the game, and that's what bred into making Tim Duncan so
Mhm.
great and being thought of as the big fundamental. Is that we fed into the things that we know that other teams don't necessarily care about as much, right? While Phil Jackson was seen in my eyes and in my opinion as more of a manager of egos.
Yeah.
Like he knows how to make sure that when you have this much talent, that they don't either boil over or they know how to remain centered on and focus on their goals, right? And we look back at like now looking at what's it called the the last dance, seeing some of
Yeah.
the clips of what he had to deal with guys like Scotty or even MJ at times, you know, and the egos that they had, you know, it was a lot that he had to manage, but that was his biggest thing was managing those. It wasn't really as much about the X and O's
Yeah.
that he was running. You saw parts of that documentary that I even showed you that MJ was calling his shot. Obviously, it was later in his career, but he's calling his shot or he's calling the shot for someone else, you know, and that's that just is where I see the separation between the two guys. Both extremely great. There's no conversation between rings, but
Yeah.
you know, one guy has 11, one has 5. Like there's really nothing to fight on with that. But when we think about the impact that one has brought and continues to bring to the league, you gotta give him you gotta give him the side up. And then I guess the last person to mention as well too. I think you mentioned him. I don't know if 100% if you mentioned him, but this guy is could very well win Coach of the Year this year. Is Ime Udoka is a part of that branch as well, and look what he's doing with the Celtics.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy of like how big that coaching tree is and how this affects the entire NBA. And then as well, you think about all the players as that have come out of Popovich's system of look at like anytime you look throughout the years, you look at the Spurs roster and you probably don't recognize like 7 of those names. But when they play, all those foreign guys are incredible and they all play so well for that system. And even just think about like the newest guy coming out of the Spurs system that's a star now, DeJounte Murray. Of like DeJounte Murray at the beginning of his career wasn't really that great. And then you look at like Kawhi, which was what was he like 15 picks somewhere around there. Tony Parker, Ginobili, like we're all these guys. Like there's so many great players that are I don't think would have succeeded the way they did if they weren't playing under Gregg Popovich, and that's just like that's the kind of like real surprising thing versus like you say, Phil Jackson was more managing these people rather than trying to develop these unknown players.
Yeah. I guess the biggest what if is now what if Kawhi just stayed? You know,
No,
we would looking at an even more storied career for Greg Popovich.
that would be insane. That would be
And
insane.
honestly, it's the gap of why he's not winning.
Yeah.
He's what he decided to do is the gap of why they're not winning.
Yeah, I hope these last couple of years don't get like don't hurt his legacy. And I don't think it will, but like you're saying, this entire time, once they lost Kawhi, he hasn't really had a star all this time.
And I guess that's why I would say too is what hurts Phil Jackson in my mind, for whether or not he's the best in my mind. Phil Jackson decided to run every time that it decided to get harder. Like we never saw what it looked like for him to coach the Bulls without MJ. He left the league, right? Then he comes back, works with the Lakers, loses in '04 with the Lakers. Shaq's leaving, peace again. Like, and then he comes back when they put together Pau Gasol and everything. Like he's never giving himself a chance to actually coach. In my mind, is the best way to put it. Because we see that now with like Steve Kerr, and I think that shows like someone that is genuinely wants to coach, like, and actually wants to develop talent. I don't think Phil Jackson ever cared for that. And now we obviously see that with the red flags those red flags that he had initially, and then going to the Knicks and complete dumpster fire there.
And I mean, you look at his offense. I mean, sadly, the triangle offense kind of just died from the NBA. And teams still run some like sets from the triangle, but like overall, he tried to run it in New York. They really try to force it down everyone's throat, and we just saw it doesn't work anymore. And it's sad. It's definitely sad. Next, do you want to move on to the weekly roundup? So
yes.
There really isn't a whole lot, but there is a few things that came up that I wanted to touch on. So one being, sadly for me, New York Knicks forward Cam Reddish is out for the rest of the season. I mean, the season's not too much, but he did try to block a shot in a transition. He took a nasty fall, landed on his shoulder, and now he has a shoulder separation. He's going to be out for the rest of the season. Jeff, what do you think about this news?
And it sucks, man. They finally gave him some minutes so he could, figure it out.
Yeah.
You see that him and RJ have like chemistry between themselves from their Duke days. That Clippers game, I believe that was when he had the injury.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And you saw early on in the game, he looked good. He looked good. The team looks good when he's out there as well too.
Yep.
So it sucks when a guy is trying to prove himself and something like this happens. And now, like, he's gonna have to prove it again when he comes back. If fingers crossed, we don't know if he's going to still be there, but if Tom Thibodeau's still there, he's going to have to prove it to him again. Maybe it would be better for him if there was someone else and like that believes in him or believes that he could make a turnaround in that situation, in that position.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, like you mentioned, he was really starting to get a rhythm. He was playing really well, and now he's going to be out for the next 6 weeks, which ranges the rest of the season. The interesting part here is this is the year where Cam Reddish is up for extension. And what the Knicks were hoping to do was to take these next couple weeks to look at Cam Reddish and be like, all right, do we want to extend him or not? And probably going forward, they probably won't give him extension and then see what happens in restricted free agency, which no one ever wants to see because any team could just start handing out Cam Reddish like insane amount of money, and do you match it or not? The interesting thing with Cam Reddish, like the reason why I don't think he's gonna sign an extension, just because it seems like he's gonna want like close to $20 million or so, when he, in my opinion, he hasn't really done enough to warrant $20 million or anything like that. because one, he hasn't played a lot, and then two, he's had some good and some bad games, but it's unproven. So you don't want to give someone like that all that money. So that's a sad situation to be in right now.
I agree. My assumption is that they're going to extend the qualifying offer.
Yeah.
We'll wait. We'll sit and wait it out. See what happens. Now, I don't foresee someone
Yeah.
doing that, like actually getting in that market and trying to pull them out. But if that is the case, we've seen how that works and how that could honestly handicap a team at times. Because
Yeah.
I've seen it with like a player like Tyler Johnson, where the Nets signed on the restricted free agent
Yeah.
offer sheet, and then Miami had to eat that, and it was not a good decision for them to eat that. And
Yeah. That
you don't want
it's
to be stuck in between that when you don't know what you want out of your player yet or see what they can actually give you and you have to pay.
Yeah, it restricted free agency is such a scary thing. Look what just happened with Lonzo Ball and the Pelicans and the Bulls. Of like, he wanted more money. Next thing you know, they end up doing a sign and trade. And honestly, at the end of the day, the Pelicans really didn't get too much for Lonzo Ball, and it's really sad to see. And like that puts them back a little bit, which is unfortunate. So you never want to be in that situation. Next, which is some new news, which is pretty exciting for the Bulls, is that Alex Caruso and Patrick Williams have been cleared for contract or contact. So they are going to be coming back soon for the Bulls. How do you think this affects them?
Greatly. Caruso, just like when he was on the Lakers, is one of the cogs that makes the engine go for the Chicago's defense. Um, uh, Robert Williams, we saw what he was before. Is it Robert Williams or is it Patrick Williams? Patrick
Patrick Williams,
Williams.
yeah,
Yeah.
Patrick.
I
Yeah.
keep on doing that. Time Lord, man. It's always on my mind. But Patrick Williams, for we saw how in the beginning of the season how impactful he was for the team. Added depth for the team. He's a little bit more versatile in how he defends than Vucevic in my mind. Having to use Vucevic all the time is very taxing for on his body and
Yeah.
on the Chicago's defense. Because I'll be honest, I don't think Vucevic is that great of a defender either. But Robert Williams, I mean Patrick Williams, definitely, definitely is a step up on the defensive side than he is to me. And like I said, another 6 fouls in my mind
Yeah.
is what he brings to. And they're going up against the likes of like a Joel Embiid.
Yeah. We saw how like impactful Caruso was for the Bulls, like especially during the beginning of the season, of like how good their defense is when he's in there. Like that's gonna be pretty exciting to see for the Bulls. Like a healthy Bulls could be a dangerous team in the playoffs. We shall see. Um Last thing, we'll end it on a good note. I saw this news that Bismack Biyombo is donating his entire salary this season to build a hospital in his birthplace of the Congo to honor his late father. It's so nice. What do you think, Jeff?
I saw that too. I did see that too.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that's a big one
Yeah.
right there, like kudos to him, and I'm sure he has a lot of money saved over if he's able to do that,
Yeah.
right? But it's players like these that give the opportunities to players like a Joel Embiid to make it out of Africa
Yup.
and play in the league. Like a lot of them go back and support where they're coming from, and I believe Joel Embiid, no, he's Cameroonian,
Mhm.
uh, but there is someone from Congo too that was in the league, but you know, I love, just like we were talking about coaching trees, I love to see when these players come back and are
Yeah.
able to give back to where they came from and then impact the next generation of stars that comes to the league. And kudos to Bismack for that.
Yeah. That
He's getting his minutes on the Suns now too. So
yeah, right. He's made a resurgence right now. The other players that came from there that are worth noting: Dikembe Mutombo, Emmanuel Mudiay, and Jonathan Kuminga. And they've all from the con.
Kuminga, there we go.
Yeah.
Real quick,
Well, and that's what I have for the weekly roundup. That is an episode. Jeff, do you have anything you want to say before we call it a show?
And I said it a few weeks ago. They need to go on a winning streak. And Brian, we meet up on Sunday. I might have to shoot you some texts of saying sorry, or maybe I'll be sending some tears. Yeah. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I need to see the Nets go on a run right now for me to still believe that they can do anything. Mm-hmm. The East playoff seeding is tightening up. Milwaukee just surpassed the Sixers recently. The Heat have a stranglehold on that 1 seed, but they got whooped by the Suns the other day. But everything's starting to look really, really, really interesting. And honestly, one thing that I'm happy about, and I don't know how people are going to take this, but I think it's good that the Bulls are finally coming a little bit more closer to down to earth. You know what I mean? Then, I think 4 is a good seeding for them for their talent and everything. So, but we'll see. We'll see how they fare in the playoffs. Yeah. We're less than a month, and once again, I have to bring it up. College basketball is heating up. I was watching the Miami versus Duke game last night for the ACC semifinals. That was a pretty good game. Can't wait till we start talking about college players soon.
Ooh, man, I am so pumped for the college player stuff. I do kind of hope the Nets win this next game, just because of I do not want to see the Knicks go to the play-in and then or anything like that. I never really want to root against my team, but I want to see them. I want to see the young players play a good game, get some good developmental minutes, and then at the end, Kevin Durant can make the game-winning shot, and then we're cool.
But, so no blowout, but a heartbreaker.
That's ideal, at least to me. I actually, before we end, I wanted to get your thoughts. How does it work if the Nets were to play the Knicks? If the Knicks were at home, can Kyrie play in New York since he's an away player? He can't. No. Why does that work like that?
Until it's pretty weird. Until they decide to lift the private employee ban that's on there, it won't change for Kyrie. There's nothing that can change that.
That's so weird because he would be considered an away player. So if he came from Washington, he would be able to play. But if he comes from Brooklyn, he's not able to play.
It's a flawed system, man, and they don't want to budge. The mayor doesn't want to budge on it. The ongoing jokes on NBA Twitter is that he's the greatest defensive player of the year.
Oh man, that's good.
We'll see what happens. Woj says it almost every week. I kid you. Growing optimism has grown in the Nets organization that Kyrie will be on the floor. And it's all right, I could hear this so many times before I don't believe it, and I'm starting to get to that point.
Oh man, that is brutal. Hey, you still have a decent amount of time till playoffs, and that's all that matters. You want this to be overturned for playoff time. But
exactly.
Yeah, this was a fun one. Follow all the socials down below. Follow the Twitter. Jeff is still always killing on there. The TikTok. Jeff's been putting some TikTok stuff on there. You want to touch on that?
Yeah, we got a TikTok going, guys. Definitely, take some snippets from the show. Obviously, we're visual creatures, and we know that sometimes you just want a little clip of seeing what we're talking about. So we'll do our best on posting on that on the TikTok account to give you a little bit of a taste of the episodes.
All right, this is a lot of fun, and this is episode 24.
Can you see that?
Yeah, we see it.